I want to thank the incredible panelists that we have here today. Their experience is extensive, and I'm not going to be able to do it justice in the time that we have allotted. So hopefully you'll check out their full bios on the webpage. But I'll highlight a little bit for each of them. We have Chihiro Hisoya. She's the head of venture management and R&D at Astellas RX. You guys probably know her best from their recent acquisition of Iota Bio. And Astellas has made a huge splash and a tremendous investment into bioelectronic medicine with our good friends there. She's in charge of exploratory development arm of Astellas to integrate medical technology and cutting edge technologies across the entire spectrum of healthcare. And she's seeking partnership opportunities for future development. We also have in New York live, thank you. I'm sorry I can't be there to meet you in person, Glenn Cornett. He's an MD PhD with Curve Therapeutics. He has a PhD in neuroscience. And before I say this, I'm going to be very glad that Arun and Glenn are on separate continents right now because his degree comes from the University of Michigan, and you'll find out why that's important in a second. His history kind of spans everything. So past 10 years developing drugs for neuropsychiatric and neurological conditions. His history includes work with Eli Lilly, where his research strategy unit developed the global financial model for things like the acquisition of Cialis. And he's a significant contributor in his past at McKinsey with high tech, heavy industry, healthcare. He's been a VP at Razorfish. Los Alamos National Lab is on his CV. And the most important thing you want to look out for is his black belt in karate. And if you and he are in a race against a bear, I'm sure he's going to win because he's run 14 marathons across 5 continents. And last but not least is one of my personal partners in crime, Arun Sridhar. He's the founder of Bioelectronic Medicine Initiative and a founding member of GSK's Bioelectronic Medicines practice, which I believe back in 2016 was valued at $190 million, and they spun off into Galvani. He was the head of discovery there. I can't remember, we've had so many conversations, and Arun, I can't remember what's off the record and what's on the record. So I'll leave it to you to describe more about what you've done there. His PhD is from Ohio State. So again, both to your corners, gentlemen. His early career included obviously time for a beer, clinical cardiology and cardiac surgery. Fun fact, ask him where he was on 9/11. It's pretty interesting. He's the co-founder of Scraps, a little podcast that we do. It's pretty fun. And he's quite opinionated, which we'll rely on here in addition to his experience. So thank you and welcome the 3 of you for coming and everyone who's online and in person joining us. And Glenn, I think you had mentioned that you might have some slides. Is that something we're going to incorporate today, or we're going to?
I figured given the complexity of the proceedings, I just leave off with those. I'm happy to share some slides later with any people who request such.
Okay, fantastic. Then we'll keep it conversational, which is how I get into the most trouble. But I think for the panel, one of the things that I'd like to know is you're each approaching this from slightly different backgrounds, well, significantly different. What, in your opinion, are the low-hanging fruit for potential collaborations between pharma and bioelectronic medicine? Or even better yet, if you'd indicate to us anything that you're personally going after. Whoever wants to go first has to, whoever's first to unmute can go first.
Okay, all right. It looks like it's me because Chihiro and Glenn have not unmuted. I will stay in the good boy books for everybody else, and for a place to be opinionated, I probably have the podcast anyway. So let's leave that to the wayside. Did you say low-hanging fruits for pharma and neuromod or bioelectronics to kind of overlap, Jojo? Is that the question? So
yeah, I think, yeah, go ahead.
So let me be controversial, not for the sake of it, but purely from an evolutionary perspective, right? So let's just explore that. The field of neuromodulation evolved from two things. One is somebody figured out that they could use an existing pacemaker lead to stimulate the brain and spinal cord, and therefore things started evolving from it as an engineering kind of incremental evolution in the lead, in the electronics, in battery, and a whole host of other things that many of the engineers can talk to, that I can only talk to at a very high level. The second thing is that the field of neuroprosthetics, which is what I think the audience is extremely familiar with, has actually shown us that you could take something at a very kind of rudimentary cardiac pacemaker-like evolution and move that into something that is much more data rich and helps patients and subjects with that form of need. But then when you look at the pharma, that's an entirely different space that the traditional pharma has always operated. They've always kind of dealt with chronic disorders that are more visceral in origin, or brain CNS in origin. But given that most pharma has actually come out of neurological disorders, neurosciences in the last decade or so, that probably tells us something, right? But I think most of it has come from that. So therefore, I wouldn't necessarily call it low-hanging fruits. I think I would probably phrase it as what is more interesting to pharma, at least from my own personal experience, is if we use nerves, and be a bit bullish from my own kind of personal experience, is to show that nerves can be as powerful in modulating physiology and disease, body functions and disease conditions, in a way that actually is as impactful as molecular treatments without potentially having the side effects. I think everybody says this, but the proof of the pudding is to actually move from the traditional neuromodulation from deep brain or spinal cord stimulation to other nerve targets that basically enable us to move into those big disease conditions that the pharma is actually interested in, would be one way that I would actually answer the question. Rather than calling it low-hanging fruit, it would be something that makes it appealing to the pharma investors or the pharmaceutical audience to transition into this. So, but I'll hand it over to the others to talk about more.
Let me jump in. This is the very interesting topic, and I completely agree to Arun. Just to back up, I'm Chihiro. I'm leading venture management and business development of RX Plus business in Astellas. Astellas is a pure pharmaceutical company headquartered in Japan, operating globally. Our top line is $12 billion, all of the revenue coming from the pharmaceutical business. My responsibility is RX Plus division, which is to explore something new, to provide the alternative solution to patient. A definition is, my role is to really to seek the new therapy, alternative treatment with the separate revenue stream from pharmaceutical business units. With that aim, my responsibility is to clearly to pursue standalone alternative solution to patient, and which is not tied to pharmaceutical business. So when it comes to low-hanging fruits, it's kind of difficult for me to connect the pharmaceutical drug with the bioelectronic medicine. For me, it would be even easier to see the opportunity exploring something independent from pharmaceutical drug, but still where we can provide our contribution to the therapy. Arun mentioned about the therapeutic area, which is the perfect example. Pharmaceutical companies are seriously thinking about the disease and the clinical practice and the patient journey. And as far as we can provide the alternative solution to the patient, that falls into our interest. If we start combining the pharmaceutical drug to a new device or a new stimulation method, that may a little complicate, because the regulatory process will be challenging and a little complex, by with the necessity of providing additional benefit in addition to the independent efficacy of the drug as well as bioelectronics. So short answer is to provide show the providing the efficacy separately from the pharma with the clear signal of indication to certain disease segment is the best way for us to see the opportunity even in bioelectronics.
All right, thank you. Obviously, some provocative and interesting statements. I'll try to be brief here. Let's think in terms of the domains in which these two industries operate. I'll present some oversimplifications because time is brief and my brain is not that large. So electrical stimulation is specific as to space, but frequently not so much for biochemical pathway. Adjusting parameters of frequency, intensity certainly can help. Still, how easy is it to have a neurochemistry platform that is specific, for example, to nicotinic cholinergic receptors, right? Similarly, conversely, it is difficult with currently approved technology to deliver a drug specifically to a particular region of the brain without an invasive procedure. Certainly saying, here's a drug that's going to hit area CA1 of the hippocampus with a minor suit in stimulating the entorhinal cortex. You can do that with electrodes. Pretty difficult right now with drugs, right? Here then are a couple ideas. Both electrical neuromodulation and pharmaceutical intervention are addressing a multidimensional state space, but the latter is directly and specifically addressing a higher level of dimensionality. As neuromodulation increases the number of dimensions it addresses, think in terms of frequency, type of current, polarity shifts, what have you, as it increases the dimensionality of the stimuli it provides, it will become that much more important and eventually, I would think, essential to certain solutions pursued by the pharmaceutical industry. Here's an example where I think some low-hanging fruit does exist. So I'm here representing Curve. We deliver drugs to the brain via very precise turbulent flow control up to the top of the nasal cavity where the olfactory nerves penetrate through the cribriform plate and where conversely the blood-brain barrier is thinner. We've been distinctly, probably uniquely successful in getting drugs up into the brain as evidenced by recent results in Alzheimer's disease. So what we can do right now is get to certain areas of the brain that are close to the cribriform plate. We've got some great data in Alzheimer's and some highly encouraging data in Parkinson's, not as large a data set, but enough to suggest, hey, we're getting there. And again, the substantia nigra, not so far from the cribriform plate, not so far from where the trigeminal nerve is penetrating the skull, another path by which we think our drugs are getting into the brain. So a great example, I think, would be either Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, where it's already possible to get drugs to a specific area of the brain. So some of the spatiotemporal specificity that you can get with neuromodulation, right? Not nearly as temporally specific, perhaps, as a high-end neuromodulatory device, but some spatial resolution greater than that for most drugs right now delivered to the brain systemically. And conversely, electrodes can pretty easily access these areas of the deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's that's been happening for quite some time, for instance. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you all. I think they're all excellent answers. I'm curious, Chihiro, you spoke of the complexity of the regulatory issues facing things like combination therapies, and Glenn, your comments about the targeting qualities and specificity of neuromodulation versus that of pharma. I'm wondering, to me, there's an obvious difference also in the way that both communities approach intellectual property. And is it something that pharma sees as a big opportunity to start protecting some of their IP portfolio in the drug regime by bringing in new modalities of either targeting the same biomarkers, the same molecules? Are they going to acquire some of these neurotechnology companies and bioelectronic medicine companies as a means of protecting their current IP and just shelving a technology in favor of the already marketed, already invested in, already adopted pharmaceutical therapeutics out there? Is that a risk, do you think? Or is there a way that we can sort of work together and learn together to develop new IP strategies that haven't been done before. And I'm going to go, Glenn, you seem adamant about, you've got something burning on the tip of your tongue.
Yes, I'm pretty excited. A great example is that a lot of the drugs delivered nose to brain are repurposing plays, right? Whether it's insulin for Alzheimer's or oxytocin for autism, two of the biggest hits out there, one would think, both in terms of humanitarian potential, but also just depth of the data currently acquired clinically. And an opportunity, for instance, for a neurostimulatory device to come in and augment what's happening with intranasal oxytocin, could take intranasal oxytocin from being repurposing of a drug that was first discovered over 100 years ago by Sir Henry Dale, who eventually went on to win a Nobel Prize, right? Taking it from about the most antiquated, unpatentable paradigm one could imagine almost, to something paired with neurostimulation, all of a sudden perhaps becoming a very tight, very patentable approach. We certainly using a different delivery device, formulation and such, helps with oxytocin. And I'm working with a company pursuing that, but coupling that with neurostimulation, it seems deliciously rich in terms of the layers of IP you could put around that, but also the benefit, the increased quality of benefit one might deliver to patients.
Great, thank you very much, Chihiro. I see you smiling. I think you.
Yeah, I can't provide that much detail of the example with the mode of action, but with the learning of the 6-7 years in this space, I have to admit how IP area are evolving, even like software as a medical device, or those software can potentially have the benefit to the IP extension to the pharmaceutical business. It's not always impossible, but there are decent evolution in the IP space with the regulation as well to admit and accept and appreciate the innovation in the new mode of action and the signals. So there are decent possibility, and we are always learning that how we can explore the new IP space evolution.
I think we just lost Jojo there. I think.
No, I'm here.
Oh,
somebody else came up.
Okay,
somebody else from the top row.
Okay. All right. So I sensed a bit of controversy stirring question there, Jojo, but I'm going to answer it in the most pragmatic and the most realistic answer that's possible from my own experience.
Don't let me down, Arun.
No, but it's also factual, right? So your question was, why would actually people, or would companies actually license a technology-based solution to ultimately keep their IP on their drugs and therefore benefit from it by shelving the technology? The answer is, why would they in a scenario, in a skeptical world, yes, but in at least in the company that I work for, and I don't work for them right now, so the views are entirely based on my own experience of working for them, is the fact that I think if at one particular point of time at our peak, we actually were exploring 20 other nerve targets that weren't called as the vagus or the spinal cord or the brain, right? So that's basically the diversity of opportunities. When that is so rich, why do you need to shelf anything would be one argument. The second argument that you could probably lay is the fact that if you're planning to move into new areas, and if you're planning to show the world that there is more things that are possible than just a hot potato or a single indication or a flash in the pan with one single nerve target, that's less attractive to a pharmaceutical company than actually showing that there is probably a platform device that could ultimately be used for stimulating or modulating multiple nerve targets, etc., for across many different therapeutic areas is more interesting. So therefore, of course, companies will license technologies that ultimately they might actually decide to put it on the shelf for business reasons or other strategic reasons. We know one big example of Medtronic shelving the pudendal nerve patents in favor of the sacral nerve stimulation patent, but that happens in every company. But in this case, at least for the company that I used to work for, which is GSK, we actually went from the biology side of things because we felt that that was our strong forte and we had to open up new markets for neuromodulation, and that's the approach that we took. But interestingly, I think I would probably change my answer now into a question, which is, I see a slight change now in the approach that the other two big pharmas have actually taken, at least what is publicly available information, is the fact that they have taken more of high-risk, high-reward technology-based solution, and then are trying to tool that to specific indication, which is a slightly different take of what the traditional kind of neuromodulation big four have actually done in the past. So that is an interesting change. And I think each company has its own strategy, but at least the ones that I know of and I worked for, that definitely wasn't the strategy to actually license something or develop something internally to just shelf it so that you could file for IPS so that nobody else could pursue it.
Okay, I'm going to pick at this just a little bit more, because I think in your reference to the shelved technology, I'm pretty sure you're referring to Sapiens. So we've seen it happen, and you also come from the perspective of being tasked with the specific mission of going out and finding new technologies to augment the biological portfolio of a globally traded, very important company. I'm wondering if others are going to have the same mindset as they come into this field. And Chihiro, I know from my communications with the folks at Iota that Astellas, that your whole team and Astellas RX Plus are firmly committed to seeing Iota's platform carry through. But I maybe am not yet so altruistic that I can believe that everybody else is going to follow suit. Excuse me. Yes. Oh. So unless any of you have anything to add to that, then we'll move on. Oh, yeah, go for it, Glenn. Please.
Let me just add briefly
a rodeo.
One rodeo. One aspect, perhaps, we haven't addressed directly, and I can't share everything clearly. Apologies if I missed it, but I don't think we've addressed so much the social issue. Right now, the pharmaceutical industry is under increasing social political pressure, right? For the past, 3 or 4 presidential election cycles, people mention us in the same breath as the fossil fuel industry or pornography, right? They don't like us a whole lot, right? And we have to, for the pharmaceutical industry to go in and do something so obvious as to knock out a therapy for epilepsy that looks really promising, or heaven forbid, Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, we get yelled at pretty specifically and give that much more ammunition to the people, the political sector that would like to hobble the pharmaceutical industry as much as possible. Right? I'll give a very personal example very briefly. My partner is a history professor and holds my industry in the highest of contempt, right? And we've been together for 3 years, and she still thinks it's evil. I happen to be a nice guy, right? There are a lot of people out there to think like that, and eventually there's going to be a lot more pressure on the industry. So I think people are a lot more sensitive to this sort of thing than they used to be. Maybe that's naive and altruistic, which I am, let's be honest here. But I think pragmatically, it's becoming more and more difficult to pull the sort of shenanigans you're suggesting.
That's an excellent point. And I hope, whatever the reason, I hope that we can start to believe that the partnerships and the investments that we'll start to see from more pharma companies will be as altruistic. And in that line of thinking, and Chihiro, I'm going to start with you on this one, because you have it firmly stated as part of your investment practice is looking at the whole spectrum of patient care. And so what is in it for the patients? How do the patients, and when, I think maybe more importantly, when will patients start to benefit from these collaborations between pharma and neurotechnology?
Thank you for asking. From patient perspective, from pharmaceutical companies' perspective, drug is everything. But from patient perspective, even for me, I just want to be cured, and I do want to manage my symptoms. And bioelectronic medicine can range from like electronic stimulation from like a transcutaneous non-invasive treatment to the implant medical device where we can just leave it there for years. And for example, for those perinatal or the postpartum, peripartum or postpartum depression, for example, they don't want to take medicine and they are eager to take the non-invasive medicine such as a non-invasive neurostimulation such as non-implant medical device. And also for, and those are the good option for those patients, and we can provide better solution to patients. And on the other hand, there are a bunch of patients who are not adequately responding to the drugs. For example, rheumatoid arthritis, there are multiple segments of people still not responding to various types of drug. And for those population, implant medical device can be an alternative option to try the new treatment. Another example also being like a chronic migraine, if the people experiencing like 10, 20 times of the event per month, and then and if the drug is not efficacious, implant medical device actually continuously stimulating the nerve and cure the heavy migraine can be a good option than taking medicine every day or doing the external stimulation every day. So by having a range of solutions, we can target various needs of the patient. And I believe having pharmaceutical a company or anybody who really care about the patient, having multiple options to care the patient will be very beneficial to patient.
Great, thanks. Arun, you've been in this realm representing a pharma company or its division for the longest. What's your take on it?
So I almost all through my scientific training as well as my work experience, I think whenever we think about therapeutics, let's not call it drugs, let's call it therapeutics, with the goal of ultimately helping people improve their quality of lives. Whenever you think of therapeutics, the first thing that people always think about is drugs. Why? Because that exactly has been kind of being explored to the greatest extent and also based on a history. And the fact that what is even more interesting, as I said before, is the ability to move into many different disease conditions for which the existing treatments are largely adequate. Chihiro kind of outlined some of them, that for which there are kind of products in development at this point of time. But there are many, many, many more for which even there are no drug treatments available. In fact, in certain cases, I mean, let's just take the classic example of obstructive sleep apnea or sleep apnea in general, even if it's central sleep apnea. You actually don't have a pharmaceutical therapy for treating sleep apnea purely because anything that would prevent an apnea from occurring would basically wake you up. So essentially there is no sleep. There might not be any apnea, but it is going to activate your central respiratory centers to wake the patient up. So therefore, the treatments in those situations are going to be purely device-based or either mechanical-based, if it's a case of CPAP, or device-based therapies. We know that in that situation, one of the most successful companies today on the stock market is not the big four with their individual, in terms of at least market cap on a single indication, is basically Inspire Medical, right? Which treats, it's a neuromodulatory approach to treat obstructive sleep apnea. So there is now huge opportunity to dig more than just the ones that we know of currently. And that in itself is a big incentive to kind of keep going. And that's what kind of drove the innovation at the time at GSK Bioelectronics that ultimately became Galvani. And that's what is driving the type of work that I'm currently doing through my Stealth initiative at this point of time.
And you know, I'm gonna pressure you to finally unstealth yourself soon, but I won't do it today. Glenn, what's your thought?
I've got a lot of thoughts. We're near the end, right? I'd like to give a plea for collaboration here. As a man who started with electrodes in his dissertation and now does drugs, I love electrodes, would love to see some in a collaboration. If you've got an approach to epilepsy or Alzheimer's or autism or Parkinson's that you want to collaborate with in terms of a drug delivered directly to the brain, please get in touch.
Can I photo bomb Glenn here? I just wanted to I just wanted to pick up on a comment, Glenn, that you made earlier about the social aspect. And yes, much of what you said about the pharma industry is true, but on Glenn's behalf, he's really a nice guy. And in addition to being a nice guy, he's a supporter of the arts, a talented musician. When he was on the West Coast in Palo Alto, sponsored musicians in his own home. And now in New York, understand he's doing the same thing.
We've done 2,400 concerts in my various offices. So yeah, we like musicians.
And Jojo, one thing you left out of his bio because, well, I didn't put it in there. Glenn was actually one of our first writers at Neurotech Business Report. He was our senior financial editor's 20 years ago. I mean,
yeah, about that.
Yes. He still looks the same though. So I wanted to get that in.
No smarter.
And thanks for letting me photobomb you.
An honor.
Well, that's one thing. We do have a couple more minutes. 8 by my calculation, because my beer's getting warm downstairs. What you all mentioned was sort of allowing there to be this drug first approach, whether by marketing and training to the masses, or just that's just how the FDA has positioned us so far. I think there's, we talk about, if you fail drug therapies for your RA or your Crohn's or your epilepsy, like we heard Nicholas just present about, and other conditions where there is no solution, when do you think we're going to have a device first option as a frontline option for care?
If you don't have existing pharmaceutical treatment, that will be one obvious scenario. I think it will, for most disease conditions, I think devices has the opportunity to become the second line of therapy. By that, what I mean is that you're not going to replace the existing generic cheaper drugs by any stretch of imagination right off the bat for most disease conditions. But what you have the opportunity to do as a neuromodulatory therapy, if we plan our late stage clinical trials the right way and show enough evidence, is to supersede some of the existing kind of chronic intake of the pharmaceutical treatments or chronic injection or delivery of biopharmaceutical treatments, etc., which actually cost a lot of money. And from an socio-economic kind of question and a payer kind of argument, I think there might be there is a huge opportunity there if we generate the weight of evidence to show that we are better than the ones that are being used as a second line of therapy, because that's the patient population that we have the biggest. That's a place where we could potentially replace the existing medications or even supersede some of the existing medications. But I don't think, for heart failure as an example, if we just take that, you're never going to replace Lasix and digoxin, which has been around for the last 150 years or 60 years in the case of Lasix, right? The furosemide diuretic. So it's just going to be what it is. But there are huge opportunities to replace some of the other existing treatments, which actually cost a lot of money. And going back to the arthritis kind of example, and I'm sure many people have heard about that from both this meeting earlier in the session as well as from others, that kind of antibodies and other biologics actually take a huge amount of money to actually pay for. Whereas if you had a device that was basically able to give you the relief, as Victor Peikoff, who is in the audience, calls it, as implant it and forget it option, you basically have that as an opportunity. And if your weight of data is good enough to replace some of the expensive biologics, then that's a great place to be. Early evidence is there in the case of arthritis and in the case of few other indications to become the second line of therapy. Sleep apnea, of course, again, you're the second line of therapy because CPAP is the most readily available, but most patients tend not to use it as an example. So that's where I would go. I don't think neuromodulatory therapies would ever become the first line of therapies at this point of time. It's a long way from there, but that's my personal bias at this stage. And there's nothing wrong with being a second line of therapy if you're really good.
Being the second child, I can say there are advantages to being second. So.
Let me jump in. What is the what makes me very excited about the bioelectronic medicine is the ability to get the data and connect to the patient continuously, which is not capable when it comes to pharmaceutical business. When the physician writes prescription and patient are taking the pill, there is no access for physician, or even we can't really chase what patients are doing and enjoying or not enjoying the drug. But for bioelectronic medicine, the beauty is that we can get the data, we can learn from the patient, and we can be more clever about the disease and patient. With that, and also the ability to get the data and connect it to the patient allows the patient to have access to the solution with a remote setting, such as telehealth connection. With the expansion of the telehealth recently, there are opportunities that, like starting with the non-invasive therapy can be a good first option if that's not super invasive. There are business cases that needs to be developed, as Aaron mentioned. When it comes to detail, is it really the good business case that can allow the first line device instead of the drugs? We have to be very selective about and clever about the disease and business cases. But with the attention to the data, I believe there is a chance that a device market will be more and more bigger.
And also, let's face it, Jojo, I think there is also a big opportunity for bioelectronic medicines companies to actually learn from the pharma companies, which is the biggest. Every time you make a new drug, you actually have to show that you're better than every single drug that is out there. And that's the only way that your payers and your patients are going to pay for it. Whereas on the devices perspective, for approval, you only have to show that it is safe. And then your commercialization, etc., is something that you figure out later down the line. But imagine a situation where if you take the big kind of impetus in terms of generating the weight of data to show that you're so better than existing treatments, I still have to see enough clinical trials that actually show that the neuromodulatory treatments are better than anything else that's out there, rather than going into last resort treatment. I think that's the space that I see the industry moving into. We'll see. But somebody's laughing at my comments, and that's great.
No, I think that's Jim. He's jumping on, telling us it's time to wrap up. So I'm not sure if we have any questions. Jim, if you promise to behave on unmute, I'll let you unmute yourself instead of laughing in the background, because I know it's lunchtime. And along with Glenn's plea for getting in touch and collaborating, I really want to emphasize that. And if there's any way that we can help any of you guys get in touch, please feel free to run that through Jim or Jeremy or myself or any of the Neurotech Reports team, or reach out to them directly. I hope that's okay.
That's fine, Jojo, and apologize for photobombing, but I couldn't resist. We do have time before lunch. We have time for one or two questions. Anyone in the room here who has a question for one of our panelists? Okay, is there anyone? Oh, wait, there is a question.
Yeah, a question for Chihiro. If she could describe a little
bit. Can we have it quiet so we can go ahead?
Yeah, so a question for Chihiro. If you could describe a little bit more about how Astellas went about making the decision to acquire Iota at what was a reasonably early stage, or seemingly early.
Okay, Chihiro, did you hear the question? Should I repeat it?
Yes, I think I heard about the reason why we acquired the company.
Correct.
So in terms of Iota relationship, we started with the investment and learned about the company, and then we moved to research and development collaboration where we explored multiple indications. And then that led us to think there are multiple use cases that we can explore with the IP. And we could have done a long-term strategic collaboration with the selected indication. Then we imagined that would be a nightmare if the other companies are doing the separate indication and we are kind of competing with each other for the same platform where we can learn a lot from there. That's one aspect. And the other, we wanted to enjoy the full spectrum of the potential platform. And the other reason is actually the talent. We don't have ability to hire talent in the bioelectronic space, but by having Iota in us, they can be a hiring manager and they can expand the team. Actually, Iota was like 8 to 10 people at the time we invested, but now they have like 50 people expanding. We could haven't done that with the pharmaceutical talent reach. So that is the how to enjoy the platform, how to enjoy the talent, to exploit the community was the primary reason that we decided to acquire the Iota.